Welcome back to the channel, and today I'm reviewing the A-COLD-WALL Spring Summer 2020 collection. Now this collection was titled Material Study for Social Architecture. Now before I continue this video, I think it's important that I leave the show notes, and if you want to read the show notes, you can pause the video at this point, because I will be referencing these show notes a lot when I talk about this collection. So if you're unfamiliar with A-COLD-WALL, it is founded and creatively directed by a man called Samuel Ross. Earlier in his career, he was actually an assistant for Virgil Abloh at the start of Off-White, and he's also designed for his own capsule collections at Oakley. So A-COLD-WALL as a whole is inspired by the British class system, and as far as the A-COLD-WALL aesthetic goes, it's ever-changing. But I would say it's very minimal, it's technical, and it's very utilitarian. So the first thing we're going to talk about in this collection was the location of the fashion show. Now this fashion show was held at Printworks London, and Printworks used to be the largest print facility in Western Europe. And it was used by companies such as Metro and Evening Standard, and now it's kind of turned into the perfect club night scene event center. You can also hire it out for different events, but for the most part it's used mainly for clubbing and nights out. So this location is important to talk about in this collection for two reasons. The first reason is Samuel Ross said himself that this location pays homage to the fact that he studied graphic design. The second reason is the concept of brutalism. Now brutalism is something that Samuel Ross loves. You can see elements of brutalism in all his work, even outside of A-COLD-WALL, like stuff he does with concrete objects. And I feel like I need to go deeper and explain what brutalism is, because if you don't know what brutalism is, you won't really understand the aesthetic of A-COLD-WALL. Quoting the show notes, it says, "Analogously, brutalism by signature can be found through garment proportion." So what this means is that the proportions and the shapes of the garments portray brutalism in the collection, and I will get into that later and show you elements of how brutalism does tie into this collection. But first, once again, we have to explain what brutalism is. So brutalism is actually a term that refers to a certain architectural style, and it was kind of popular in the 1950s and the 1960s, and kind of had its peak around the 1970s. So brutalism is characterized by big block materials, and the structures are normally made of raw concrete, steel, sometimes even brick. The buildings are normally made out of bare materials, and the shapes are very geometric. Now architecture is something that is inherently complex, so the reason why brutalism was so big and so many people are fans of brutalism is kind of this whole concept of less is more, or simplicity sometimes looks more elegant than when you try to do too much. So at a time where architecture was so complex, and there was this new movement of architects who were stripping down all the elements of architecture and literally just having raw concrete materials to finish their buildings, it was kind of strange, and it was kind of this thing where the buildings were ugly or considered ugly, but there was beauty in the ugliness, so to speak. We kind of saw this architectural style being translated into fashion, and that's why when you characterize brutalism in fashion, it explains clothing that exhibits similar elements to that of architectural brutalism. So that would be monochromatic pieces, things that are very minimalistic, geometric shapes in clothing. So we see a lot of those elements in this A-COLD-WALL collection. If you look at the bags in look 1 and in look 16, these portray brutalism perfectly. And Samuel Ross is someone who definitely loves brutalism. He has a project that he works on, and he kind of makes homeware, and it's called Concrete Objects. And if you look at all the things that he makes with concrete objects, almost every single thing he makes portrays brutalism. Concrete Objects is literally the epitome of brutalism. And the fact that it even has concrete in the name just shows that Samuel Ross is definitely obsessed with the concept of brutalism. Now looking at the collection in a wider sense, this collection explored the relationship between materials and emotion. Samuel Ross kind of portrayed this by focusing on 4 materials in particular, and this was clay, lead, water and glass. Samuel Ross then went ahead to describe these materials as the scaffolds of society, and he said that these are materials that everyone comes across, which is very true in their daily life, and you can't really navigate your way through life without encountering these 4 materials. Quoting the show notes, it says, "Materials are humanized via amplification of property analogy, reflected in scale, proportion, and controlled use of color isolation. A strict process of semiotic refinement has to be adhered to for the 4 compound categories, showing an evolution in collection refinement and color development. What this means in simpler terms is that every single look in this collection referenced one of the materials, whether in form, shape, texture, or color. Every single look in this collection was a reference to at least lead, clay, water, or glass. Now, if we look deeper into the materials, if we start talking about clay, for example, the color of clay, depending on the proportions, where you get it from, what heat it's at, if it's been burnt, can vary from white to grey to brown to like a rusty orange. If we look at lead comes in forms of black, and then if we look at water and glass, they are translucent. However, we associate water with the color blue because big forms of water like oceans and rivers, lakes, the reflection from the sky makes them appear as blue. And now if you look at the color palette in this collection, every single look was either a rusty orange, a brown, a white, a grey, a blue, or a black. And this is so sick when I think of how something as simple as even the colours has all been a reference to all these 4 materials. I think that's really sick. Now, Samuel Ross described the first 10 looks as the clay section. This can be seen in many ways. If you look at the models that were walking during the first 10 looks, they actually had clay plastered around their face and in parts of their hair. So it's very obvious to realise that this was the clay section of the collection. The first 10 looks also showed to us the concept of body mapping, which was a big proponent in this collection. Quoting the show notes, it says, "Body mapping through concise pattern cutting is abstracted yet identifiable throughout the collection's silhouettes, representing a shift in design process and the conscious decision to exalt what is human, organic, and above the notions of the inanimate." So what this means in simpler terms is the first 10 looks especially, and this is kind of a theme throughout the collection, the clothing was supposed to take the form of the human body, as opposed to the focus in past collections in which clothing kind of protected the human body instead of shaping with the human body. And that's where the term of body mapping comes in, when he says that body mapping was achieved through concise pattern cutting. So the way he's cut the patterns is made in a way where it really shapes with a human form. And this was also achieved through the materials that he used in these looks. So if you look into the materials of these looks, the materials are soft. A lot of the materials are elastic. So this helps with kind of like a concept of memory foam, where it kind of shapes with the body and takes the form of the body, and then it gets used to the shape of the body. Going back to lead being in the form of black, a lot of looks in this collection were black. A lot of looks in this collection were just pure black, and obviously that was a reference to the lead in this collection. For some more obvious references, models actually had a lot of materials on their faces. So there were some models who had this kind of plastic translucent looking material on their face, and my suggestion would be that this was supposed to portray the glass in this collection. And then there were also some models that featured lead with adhesive stuck on their faces, and obviously this was supposed to reference the lead in the collection. Part of the collection I really enjoyed was during the part that Samuel Ross wanted to portray water and the water section of the collection, a mist actually started to form, and it made the models wet, and the models' faces were seen as very wet, and their clothing was a bit wet. So this was very recognizable as the water section, and I thought that was really cool and conceptual to kind of have that shift within the collection. Talking about this collection in a more simplistic way, we saw a lot of A-COLD-WALL staples in this collection, from the utilitarianism to the technical aspects to the pleated trousers, the asymmetric pieces like the bags and the blazers, and we saw much more. A-COLD-WALL also teased their upcoming collaboration with Diesel's Red Tag project, their denim project. And we saw this in look 12, which featured kind of like an acid wash, acid dyed piece. Now, one of the biggest points of this collection, and a big talking point, especially when I was at London Fashion Week, was the footwear. I really like the footwear in this collection because Samuel Ross showed a wide range and variety of footwear in this collection. And it shows how he's building his range, and not gonna lie, I was impressed by how much depth he showed that he can design different types of footwear. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is the most talked about stuff, which was the footwear that was in collaboration with Converse. So we saw something that resembled a Chuck Taylor, but it was kind of modified in the way that there was an added cleated sole, and then there were also different elements that were different to your traditional Chuck Taylor silhouette. So the end product kind of had the sneaker looking like sort of a hiking boot, which is what a lot of people were saying. I personally like this take because it's very unique on the Converse Chuck Taylor, but I know everyone doesn't share the same opinion. The second pair of footwear I saw in this collection was a high top silhouette, and it had an ankle strap, and this was a silhouette I've never seen before, and I'm not even sure if this specific one was in collaboration with Converse or if this is just A-COLD-WALL on its own. But apart from that, there was also some other footwear. There were these backless loafers that were really nice, and I found them really nice. They're very unisex, very stylish. I actually saw Samuel Ross wearing these loafers at Paris Fashion Week, and he styled them really nicely. And the last pair of footwear I recognized in this collection was kind of these low tops that looked like canvas sneakers. So once again, there was a wide variety of footwear in this collection, was a big talking point, and it was good to see Samuel Ross show his range in terms of footwear. Quoting the show notes, it says, "Graphic elements are further reduced and refined, encompassing a formless nature, not subject to graphic statements." So what this means in simpler terms is he relied less on the A-COLD-WALL logos and branding in this collection, and he focused more on refined tailoring. And this is why you see less logo mania like we've seen before, where Samuel Ross did kind of rely on the A-COLD-WALL logo to kind of push sales. And I think now he wants people to focus more on his silhouettes, the shapes, and the inspiration behind the designs, rather than just buy into the brand because there's this recognizability with the logos on the garments. One of Samuel Ross's biggest criticisms actually that he gets from people is that his past few shows have been spectacles, they've been very artistic, but when it comes to the wearability of the garments, they're not really wearable. And I like how in this collection, even though he made it more commercial and wearable, it's not lazily more commercial, it's very conceptually more commercial. And he's done it in a very smart and intelligent way. And I really like the direction in which A-COLD-WALL has gone in this collection. And I feel like this is probably his best collection he's ever made. But obviously it's down to opinions, but that's just in my personal opinion. In other news, Samuel Ross actually won the GQ fund and he won £150,000. And what was really crazy was he donated his prize money from the fund to an up and coming designer who has worked for him for a really long time. And his name is Eastwood Danso, and he's an up and coming designer in London. I think he goes to CSM, but don't quote me on that. And Samuel Ross even made a statement saying that he hopes this can kind of channel and cause other designers to kind of support younger talent and emerging talent in London. And he kind of went on talking about how it was really hard for him as an outsider to make it in the industry. So any way he can, he's helping emerging talent. And I mean, when someone's doing stuff like that, donating £150,000 to emerging designers, I just don't see how you can personally hate someone that does stuff like that. And to go further into this kind of subject, his A-COLD-WALL show was open to the public, so you could actually apply for the show online, and if he accepted you to come to the show, then you could actually go. And this is back to the whole concept of he was an outsider and he doesn't like this whole bourgeois setting of fashion and how it's so upper class and it's very hard to find a way in. In his clothing you can kind of see a lot of commentary to socialism, and there's also the commentary in just things he does, like donating £150,000 to an emerging designer or opening his show to the public, the general public. So that is literally A-COLD-WALL Spring Summer 20 in a nutshell. Comment down below what you really liked about the collection. Definitely subscribe to the channel, like this video, turn on your post notifications so you're notified when I post a new video. Shout out to High Fashion Talk, the Facebook group, because I wouldn't have been able to go to London Fashion Week without High Fashion Talk. And special shout out to Harrison and Iolo, because those are the main people that helped me during London Fashion Week. And yeah, on that note, that is A-COLD-WALL Spring Summer 2020 in a nutshell. Great collection from Samuel Ross. I'm definitely looking forward to what he has in store next. Obviously, he's going to release the Converse collaboration soon, as well as the Diesel collab I think is going to release in November. So yeah, on that note, well done Samuel Ross, and I'm out.